From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, theZoomer, hosted by Marissa Lennox.
Welcome to theZoomer. I'm Marissa Lennox. If you've been feeling like your paycheck doesn't stretch as far as it used to, you're not alone. A new report from Canada's budget watchdog warns that inflation and interest rates have significantly eroded the purchasing power of middle and lower income Canadians since 2022. In fact, more than half of Canadians are teetering on the edge of insolvency with just a $200 cushion, according to another report. On top of this, Canada's government debt has doubled since 2008, and just last month, 1 in 20 businesses closed, the largest setback since the pandemic. On today's show, we take a look at the state of Canada's economy and the growing debt crisis, and we'll share tips for managing your finances in this tough climate. Let's bring in the panel, all in studio. Welcome to you all. And Avi, I'll begin with you because it feels like we're in a recession, though we're not technically. Why does it feel that way?
Well, Marissa, it feels that way because people are much worse off than they used to be. If you look at GDP per person, in 2023, it's the same as it was in 2014. So we're going back 10 years where there has not been any significant improvement in economic conditions.
We are anticipating a rate cut from the bank on October 23rd, Ron, but we're looking at it, I think it's stalled in August. So what can we expect from the bank this time around?
We can expect continued cuts. There'll be a cut on the October date. There'll be another cut in December, further cuts next year. The Bank of Canada governor is well aware of the difficulties in the Canadian economy, and the inflation is, for all intents and purposes, tamed. So, by the way, that doesn't help anybody who has to go out and buy groceries because those prices haven't come down. Not at all. They haven't come down a nickel. But the rate of increase has slowed to a manageable level. So we'll see nothing but cuts. That won't help everybody. It won't help anybody with a mortgage except those that are on a variable rate mortgage. Those payments may or may not go down. The real issue we have is for people renewing a mortgage. About just under 40% of all the homeowners in Canada have a mortgage. And for the last 2 years and for the next 2 years, every one of those people will receive a renewal where they will pay more than they were paying in the past. They have received it or they're going to receive it.
Did you say for the next 2 years?
Yep, for the next 2 years, that's right. Because the people who got a mortgage 2 years ago, in many cases got a mortgage that was 149, 209, 229, in some cases variable, 1.25, and all of those mortgages are up. Some have already gone up, many have already renewed, always to higher rates, but those people with those very low rates from 2 years ago will be renewing over the next 2 years.
I'd like to just pick up on one of the things Ron said about the rate of inflation, because there's a lot of misconceptions that are out there. People are being told, oh, it's really good news. The rate of inflation has dropped from 8% to 6% to 2%. But that doesn't mean prices are going down. So for example, if the rate of inflation last year was 8%, I'm just making up a number, something that cost you $100 the year before cost you $108. This year, it's dropped to 2%. Well, that's going to be a 2% increase on 108, so it's roughly $110. So you're hearing the rate of inflation is falling, but prices are still going up. In fact, in economics textbooks 10 years ago when we taught introductory economics, there was no word that's now very important called disinflation. We just talked about price increases or price decreases. But what we're experiencing now, and it hasn't been around for decades, is what's called disinflation, where, as Ron said, the rate is falling from 8 to 6 to 4, but prices are still going up. So the pain is still very real, even though the headlines are, oh, it's really good news, the rate of inflation is falling, it's in the Bank of Canada's target range. That's not helping people in terms of lower prices.
Well, and what a lot of people are wanting is to get deflation. They're wanting to see prices actually start to fall. And in certain consumption categories, you will see that. But broadly, it's pretty much economic consensus that you don't want to get deflation. And so the Bank of Canada will work pretty hard to make sure we don't end up in a deflationary situation, which is part of the reason that they're cutting now. They do not want us to fall into a situation of generalized prices falling, because that has lots of much more widespread negative economic consequences.
Can you just explain that in layman's terms for people?
The general understanding is that when prices are falling, people will delay their purchasing. And when people delay their purchasing, then the income of those who depend on those purchases is going to fall. And then that will lead them to not make the investments that we need. And so you can just get in this downward spiral of the economy contracting as prices are falling.
This is what happened to Japan in the 1990s, which they refer to as the lost decade, is that there was deflation, people started putting off purchases, and it was a vicious circle. So even though to all of us falling prices sounds like a dream come true, for the economy as a whole, it's a nightmare.
Because people, yeah, go ahead.
So for the economy as a whole, what we're really wanting to see is incomes catch up to where prices rose to.
All right.
Well, there's no danger in Canada of wages catching up to prices. That is not in the cards. I mean, we've had endless wage stagnation in this country over a decade. And that's being reflected in just how terrible the experience for the average person is right now. For the average human being, they have lower, their wages have not caught up with anything they've done. Their mortgage is going up, their rent's going up. Everywhere they turn, it's more expensive. And the opportunities, the chances of them being able to achieve a big wage increase or a pension increase or any other kind of an increase is virtually non-existent.
It feels a little bit strange to be the labor economist on the panel and having to say that on average, and the PBO report said this, purchasing power is higher now than it was in 2019. So on average, people have recovered the purchasing power that they lost because of inflation. Now that said, this is very uneven. There are people who have fallen very far behind, and that would especially include people who are on fixed incomes, because most of them aren't going to have any kind of inflation elevator, and so they've seen massive erosion in their purchasing power. Where for people who are out negotiating their wages, and they're able to now get higher wages that have recaptured purchasing power.
All right, let's take a quick break. Coming up, debt is something we all deal with. We've got some practical tips to help you manage your finances in today's tough economy. Stick around. Welcome back. So here's an interesting contrast. Canada ranks among the top countries in the world for financial literacy, yet we also hold one of the highest household debt to income ratios. As of the second quarter of 2024, that ratio stands at 175.5%. To put it simply, for every dollar of disposable income, Canadians owe $1.76, whether it's through mortgages or credit cards or other loans. In other words, many households are carrying more debt than their income can cover. So let's unpack this, talk about what it means. Marlene, set the stage for us. I'd like you to sort of describe maybe a couple nearing retirement, maybe they've got some debt, some credit card debt, mortgage debt. What would that scenario look like?
Okay, well, we're going to talk about a couple that's age 60 and they're about to retire in 5 years. And kids are grown and out of the house. So if we look at their expenses, they have $2,300 in their regular bills. They're servicing debt of at $700 a month, and that's just to make the minimum payments.
So this is assuming they have some amount of debt.
Yes,
Okay.
And the debt was accumulated from, spending a little bit too much, so the credit cards accumulated just over time, and then they had a leak on the roof, or something happened in their home where they had to use their home equity line of credit, or also known as a HELOC. So they are contributing still to their RSP, $1,500 a month, and this unknown $6,500, they might sometimes put it on debt payments or just spend it.
Do a lot of people do that?
A lot of people will have this unknown spending, and they might go, oh, well, I'm gonna put $2,000 on this debt, pay down my debt.
That sounds like a good thing.
It is a good thing, except the next month something else comes up and they're just dipping into the debt again. So it's just leading them to go in circles. So what I like to recommend is to have a little more structure to it. So if you get structure to your cash flow, you actually have a lot more control over it. And when you feel in control, you lower the stress, and it helps you be able to make better decisions. So if we look at this example, they've got $200,000 in savings, and let's look at their debt. They've got $65,000 in debt, so $20,000 on a credit card, $45,000 on their line of credit. Now this $200,000 in savings, they have earmarked for gifts for their children to buy a home. But we have not been able to talk them out of this gift to the children. So this money is set aside for the children, and they're
And it's non-negotiable.
It's non-negotiable, so nothing's going to change their mind. So what we're doing is we're looking at, this is a resource that they have, and what I tell people when they're coming up on retirement planning is look at all of your resources. So in this example, they're not going to tap into their RSPs to pay off their debt. What we're going to do is recommend they use some of this savings to pay down the debt. So now their savings is down to $135,000, but we're going to replace it over the 5 years so that they do have the $200,000
To eventually give.
exactly to
their
eventually give to the children.
Okay, so how do we do that?
So by putting $980 a month away for 5 years at 4%, they will end up with the other $65,000 back into the TFSA.
So just explain where this 980 came from, because in the previous slide, they had zero left over at the end of the month.
So they're now not making that $700 minimum debt payment.
Okay.
And we assume, 280 out of the 6,500 can go towards this.
Okay, so if you're not servicing debt, you have that money.
You have that money
that
in
you
your
can
cash flow.
contribute.
Yes.
That'll earn a 4% interest, assuming you're investing safely, wisely
We're
into a
assuming
TFSA.
conservative. And we're using the TFSA because this couple in this example have never contributed to a TFSA, which is another resource they would have access to. One thing I will say to all your viewers, be very careful about TFSA contribution limits. You can check your limit on the CRA website, the My Account on the CRA website. It will tell you your contribution limit and everything that's happened within your TFSAs. If you over-contribute, you get dinged a 1% penalty per month on the over-contribution. So you imagine someone makes a big mistake early in the year, they're not gonna find out about it until much later, and now they may have 9 or 10 months of this over-contribution. So that's a very important thing to note. So how we would set them up differently is they've got their $2,300. In this example, their home is paid for, so they've got the $2,300 a month in their fixed expenses, $1,500 in their RSP contribution rooms, and then I like to use a weekly spending amount that is reasonable for lifestyle, just day-to-day needs, groceries, gas, not just essentials, but like everything in the day-to-day life, transit, personal care.
Let me just ask you, because I think this is a big question for a lot of our viewers. How should they think about, as a percentage of their monthly income, breaking that up between essential items and discretionary items?
Okay, good question, but I like to not use the terms discretionary, non-discretionary, because what I try to do is reduce the stress about money. And when you tell people this is your need and this is your want, you start getting into the people feeling guilty for getting a coffee at Starbucks. So we don't want that.
They can
add up, but for my clients, if they're within their weekly spend, it doesn't matter to me whether they go to Starbucks all week long or eat out or buy groceries. If they can get through the week in their comfortable lifestyle on their weekly amount, then it works with their planning. And
so you've put them on a budget.
Yep. well, I don't like to call it budget. Weekly spending. It's a new terminology.
Okay. We put them on a weekly spending.
Weekly spending. And savings to replace the TFSA. And then the last column, 2320, is what's left over, and that becomes like a fixed expense. It just automatically goes into short-term savings.
Well, you know what, this is something I think that a lot of our viewers can relate to, trying to balance their fixed expenses with their weekly spending. So we're gonna open it up to the panel when we come back. Stick around, don't go away. Welcome back. I'd like to welcome Lesley-Anne Scorgie, founder of MeVest, to the round table, and we've been talking about debt. Now, before the break, Marlene stressed focusing on paying down one's debt before using any savings. But, Lesley-Anne, here is the thing. What if people don't have any savings to pay down their debt? What do you recommend?
Well, interesting, Marlene actually pointed at the secret to getting out of debt happens to be that you start saving a little bit, because savings actually prevents debt from happening in the first place. But if you are in a situation where you just don't have that flexibility to start saving, by the way, even $1 a day can be adequate saving. But if you don't have that flexibility, you are looking at trimming things that are not helping you in your budget. And you can call it whatever you want, a spending plan, whatnot. But these are things that are nice to have that maybe you don't need. And I think of like what happened during the pandemic in particular. A lot of people like loaded up with things like subscriptions, and they signed up for things and they added expenses for entertainment. A lot of people have cut that out in recent years, and they're still cutting. So we are not talking about big dollars. If you're really strapped at first, starting to save just a little bit can go a long way.
Avi, I know you're an economist, but what are your thoughts on borrowing to pay down debt?
Borrowing to pay down personal debt?
Yeah.
Well, if you're fortunate enough to have a line of credit, you should not have any balance on your credit cards, because you're paying, 20% interest on that, and your line of credit is 5 to 10, depending on the time of year or era. So that's a pretty simple rule, which is you borrow at the lowest amount and you pay off things that have the highest interest rate.
You're in the business. How important is a credit score for lenders?
Credit score is often misunderstood by the consumer, because we have tons of organizations who want to sell us monitoring of our credit, or tell us that the monitoring of our credit rating is something that's going to be of great help to us. It is complete falsehood, and it's utterly ridiculous. The way the lending business really works is there's a cutoff. And the scores we use people who actually do lend are completely different than the algorithms that these services produce. So we would look at a cutoff, and let's just say for example, it's 680 is a cutoff. At that point, if you're above 680, we don't care if you're 880, as long as you're not below it. So that's the way lending really works when it comes to credit scores.
Is having multiple credit cards a credit score disaster?
No, because you could have zero balance on all of them, and you look like a hero.
What's the best way to negotiate with lenders?
Threaten them. The best way to negotiate with a lender is to threaten them. So you say, all right, this is what we're offering. Yeah, that's terrible. I'm going to take all my business away from you, and I'm going to go to lender X, who is offering me a better deal. Wait. Oh, suddenly we've realized we can offer you a good deal because you're going to take all your business away from us. So that's consistently the best way to work with a bank on a mortgage, is to have gotten quotes for a lower rate and then just say, well, to heck with you, we're going to move our, stop. We might have a special for you. And all of a sudden, you're in a better position.
Lesley-Anne, we talked about a line of credit earlier, Avi and I, and for those approaching retirement, a line of credit, if you are lucky enough to have one, can be a tempting financial solution, if you will. But what are some of the things people should be mindful of when opening a line of credit?
I think you want to shop it around, very similar to what Ron just mentioned. You want to shop it around and make sure that you're getting the lowest rate possible. Secured lines of credit do have a lower rate than unsecured ones. Those are the types that are like what Marlene mentioned in the previous segment, like a HELOC, a home equity line of credit. As you enter retirement zone, we'll say, within a few years out, and maybe even you cross the line and you're starting into your retirement, just debt management, generally, you want to rely less and less, if not like rely zero on debt for your needs, because that income tends to dip and drop in retirement years. So very mindful as you're using this tool. And, I do counsel and coach people often right now if maybe they've been pushing off doing that consolidation. Maybe it's a self consolidation of credit card balances going onto a line of credit. Maybe it's going to get a consolidation loan at a lower rate. If they haven't yet gone about that process to investigate if a consolidation to a lower rate is an option, now is a good time. The rates are shimmying down slowly here. And that is going to make it a little bit more economical. But it's very much just about being mindful to not take on too much. It's not the right time in life to be taking on, especially consumer debt.
Many people in our audience nearing retirement or in retirement. What are some of the top tips you have for someone looking to prepare for retirement financially?
So the first thing, and this is for young people as well, that gets missed, are group matching on RRSPs. So if your employer offers a match, it's always important to do that first, because it's free money. You're missing. It's the largest gain you can get by just simply matching that RSP. The second thing would be to try to max out your RSP. You have years just before retirement. Let's say you have 5 years and you have RSP contribution room. You use it during those years because you'll get the maximum tax benefit, because you won't have that option. It won't make sense after that, after retirement. And then consider downsizing and the time frame for downsizing. But that is also one of your resources in retirement. If you are downsizing, you're able to possibly extract some equity from the home to be able to also further help your retirement.
Well, it's a perfect segue into our next segment, which is to talk about housing. So let's take a bit of a break here, and we'll pick this up on the other side. Don't go away.
Yeah, RJ, and over here we have a really cool open concept living dining kitchen space.
Wow, this really is a nice 2-bedroom condo. Too bad for $1.8 million, I just can't afford it.
So Steve, what are some of the strategies that young people are using in order to buy their first home?
The Bank of Mom and Dad is real, and it's helping young Gen Xs, Gen Zs, and millennials get into the market. So when the parents have owned a property that they probably purchased for $400,000 and it's worth $2 million now, there's a lot of equity in that property. They could just pull out a down payment, gift it to the children, and the children can get into the market, and then their game can begin.
The rise of inflation and interest rates, along with the inequality of wages compared to the cost of housing, creates a situation that is financially tough to navigate. So I'm going to go talk to young people to see how they feel about housing affordability. Adam is a small business owner who also cuts hair part-time on the side. His goal is to purchase his first piece of real estate. Adam, do you feel as though all your hard work is worth it to purchase real estate?
I think it definitely is. I think in the long run, of course right now in the short run, it's going to be a lot of work and a lot of hours, blood, sweat, tears put into the business and the work I'm doing. But in the long run, I do think it'll pay off.
It's just become so hard because our wages have not kept up with inflation, I think. And I think with the population growing in Canada as well, it's just going to become harder and harder.
As somebody who wants to travel in the future, do a bunch of things that cost money, it's hard to do when you have a mortgage looming over your head.
The only way I'd be able to really own something in the near future is if my parents went in and co-signed with me, or or if my partner and I, if we signed together and his parents and my parents signed. I feel like we're not in a position right now to be able to own anything with just our own names.
Thanks, RJ. That's some really interesting commentary from folks on home ownership and whether or not they feel it is out of reach. You know, baby boomers, they've always thought of their homes as their retirement safety nets, and they've certainly benefited from rising property values over the years. Now, as home prices are dipping, they're involved in helping their kids achieve the same. A recent study from CIBC found that the average gift for home purchases has jumped nationally to $115,000, and in British Columbia to $204,000. Now, that is a lot of money, but I wonder to what extent it's the parents' dream for them, or if youth and younger generations actually do want to own a house. Like, is that dream gone? Because boomers used to be house poor in order to get that mortgage, to get that dream of house ownership, and I wonder if it's gone today, DT.
I think most people still want to own a home because you want to own a home because you want this thing that's yours. It's a thing that you can make into a home. It's not just a house. And I can speak from experience that when you're a renter and you're raising children and you think about ways that you would like to make your living space reflect you more, you hesitate because these can be capital investments into that space that you don't actually own. So home ownership is really a cultural experience as well as an economic experience. And home ownership having become unattainable for so many young people, I think is also contributing to this feeling of uncertainty that I talked about before, that young people don't know what their futures will look like. We have tended to think our lives will look more or less like our parents', ideally a little bit better. Do young people today have that feeling? I don't think so, and I think the unaffordability of housing is an important and underappreciated aspect of that.
You know, it's really interesting because as someone who owns their home, although the bank owns a good portion of my home, I would like to see my home appreciate in value. I look at it as an investment. But what do you think about people viewing their home as their investment? Is that the right idea?
Well, it's certainly been a factual idea. If you bought a house 10 years ago, 15 years ago, particularly the people who bought 40 years ago for about 118 grand and a sack of potatoes, those people...
You're talking about the Ukrainians.
Those people have had astronomical, unbelievable increases in the value of their properties, far different than in... One of the things that confuses us in Southern Ontario and parts of British Columbia is that in the United States, for instance, there's been no such incredible appreciation in homes except for a couple of cities. So we're in an odd place for many of us in Ontario and British Columbia. But the reality is, no, we are turning the idea of homeownership into a kind of a feudal system. CIBC determined that if your parents are a homeowner, it enormously increases the chance of their children being a homeowner, because we're back to medieval times where land was passed from one generation to another. Because let's face it, if your average house price in Southern Ontario and British Columbia is 9, 10, 11, 12 times income, average family income, the opportunities to get into that situation are very small, unless somebody is giving you a huge hand up. That's just reality.
The rising house prices, leaving behind income, it's really become a form of intergenerational value transfer from younger generations to older generations. Older generations are selling their homes with these, huge increases in equity value that's transferring wealth from younger generations to these older generations. We used to have a better system for doing a similar thing called pensions. So the rise of house prices have come to substitute for having substantial pensions that we could count on in retirement. And pensions are a much more equitable system of performing this transfer from younger generations to older generations than home ownership is. There's a Canadian economist, Blair Fix, who showed that housing affordability is really tied to house prices increasing in line with income. As soon as house prices start to increase much more than income, then you get into situations of housing becoming unaffordable.
Because it used to be you wouldn't pay more than 3 to 4 times your gross income on a home. That used to be the rule. And otherwise you were getting in over your head. And now when it's at 10, 11 times, it's unattainable. And what I see are the people that have the money to give to the kids for homes. A lot of times that isn't just their regular savings, it's usually coming from an inheritance. So it's even coming from the other generation down to down to the boomers, and then down to the kids. So
or
even
from,
more
or from
speaking,
a HELOC, or from a HELOC.
or from a HELOC, yes.
And we already have a problem.
I'm saying the ones that can afford it, it's because it's from an inheritance.
Okay, but the question is, we are where we are, so what do we do? Like, how do we help younger generations, and how do older generations maintain the wealth that is sitting in their home right now?
So the trick is that we do not want to crash the housing market. That would not be good for anyone. I know younger people have these dreams that, oh, well, if house prices just crash, then I could afford one. Well, if house prices crash, there's a good chance that your job's gonna go along with it, and then you're definitely not gonna be able to afford a house. So trying to make house prices level off while incomes rise is the really tricky part of it. And I mean, I think we all more or less know the answer, which is supply. We need much more supply, and I'm gonna suggest that we need government to get back into the role it once had of building more affordable, non-market housing that can be an important on-ramp for people into the housing market.
Yeah, stepping stone. All right, let's take a quick break. When we return, it's your turn. We've received some great questions about personal finances, and we're here to discuss them, so stay with us. Welcome back. We've been getting a lot of great financial questions from you this week, so let's get right into the first one. Here's what Samantha writes. I'm 56 years old, was never taught about money management, and have kept it all in my savings account due to a fear of losing it all. My friends have said I should be investing it. I have no clue where to start, feel embarrassed to even ask. Are there different risk levels when investing? Any guidance would be appreciated. Lesley-Anne, I'll start with you.
Oh, what a great question. And I love that Samantha's friends are encouraging her. There are different risk profiles, and I like to actually use a 5-point scale when I'm explaining this. So 5 being high risk, 1 being low risk. So in your 20s, you can be a 5, you can be high risk. In your 30s, you shimmy down to a 4. In your 40s, you're shimmying down to a 3, your 50s a 2, and then in your 60s down to a 1. So as you age, you're reducing risk, getting ready for retirement. But Samantha's question is really about where do you get started? There's a couple of options. There's the more traditional path, going to your bank and working with a financial planner over there or an investment counselor over there. Those are very traditional paths. You could DIY it. I don't think I'd recommend that though for Samantha. DIY is a very complex, a complex thing to get right. But there are other options these days due to technology, things like robo-advisors that leverage the exchange traded fund market, and they put together managed portfolios. For Samantha, though, I think it's very much about don't do this on your own. Get some help. Go and talk to a few planners would probably be my best advice before making any investment decisions, because it is a big decision. To grow money, you do need to expose it to some risk in the market. You know, not recently though. You up until recently, you were able to get a really good rate on your savings. 4 or 5%. But as those rates taper off, those opportunities to really earn within a savings account are kind of evaporating pretty quickly. So it's probably time to go and seek some investment counsel as a starting point.
All right, great advice. Let's get to Henry. He's in studio. Go ahead. What's your question?
The elephant in the room is that wages aren't keeping up with inflation, and the only people whose wages are coming close to keeping up with inflation are unionized workers. So that's the big problem that we haven't discussed here today. I do have a question. There's now been discussion of the Bloc Québécois proposing that the increase of the OAS go to people who are over 65 and not only people over 75. There's been talk about that causing a hit to the federal budget. Well, I have a question. What if, in addition to that, alongside that, we reduced the threshold for clawback of OAS, let's say from 91,000 income to 85 or maybe 81? How would that have an impact? Or what if we just raised the tax rate on, let's say, people with incomes over 250,000. How would either of those options offset the hit to the federal budget caused by what I hope will be an increase of the OAS to those over 65? Thank you.
Thank you for your very eloquent and thoughtful question. DT, go ahead.
Yeah, first on the elephant in the room, I'm actually sorry, Henry, you have it completely backwards, that in fact, union wages have not yet recaptured their purchasing power because of the nature of how union wages are set, because they're bargained periodically, and we have not yet had the time to fully bargain back all of that lost purchasing power. Unionized workers have actually fallen a bit behind. Their wages are still higher than non-unionized workers, which is why I would encourage everyone to find a unionized position, but it will take time for unionized workers to get back that lost purchasing power. With respect to the expansion of OAS, the Canadian Labour Congress supports this, and as an economist, I support this. And the main reason I support this is that poverty among elders who don't live with family is shockingly high. This is a group that really have fallen through the cracks. Family is an extremely important safety net, but it's an incomplete safety net. And there can be all sorts of reasons why someone who's in their 60s is not living with family and is not benefiting from the various financial gains that come along with that. So augmenting our government supports will really help those folks. OAS and GIS help lift this group much further out of poverty once they hit their 60s, and I think we need to expand this to protect them. In terms of how we implement it to get some money back to the government, I think some of Henry's suggestions are worth examining. But the devil is always in the detail when it comes to formulating policy, what the unintended consequences might be. I think the main point is that we need to be looking much more at poverty among our older population and how we can lift them out of that. Because this should be a source of shame, frankly, for Canadians, that 1 in 8 people over the age of 65 lives in poverty.
Ron or Avi, do you guys have anything to add?
Well, in Norway, a couple of years ago, they decided to raise taxes on the wealthy and increase capital gains for people. They thought they would generate well over billions of dollars worth of new revenue. All the rich people left Norway, and now they've experienced an enormous contraction in their tax base. You know, there's just not, someday we've all got to talk about the idea that maybe our government, all levels of government, could spend less foolishly. And at that point, we probably wouldn't need as much taxes to sustain good social programs.
All right, those are some great questions. We'll get to some more on the other side. Stick around. Welcome back. We're answering questions from our audience. I always find these questions to be so thoughtful, and so I really do love this portion of the show. The next question comes from Sharon in our in-studio audience. Go ahead.
Hi, Marissa. I've heard about crypto. Don't know too much about it, but what do you think of investing in crypto?
Go ahead,
I would say absolutely do not. It's yes, there are people who have made money, but it's an utterly speculative investment, and the only money I would put into crypto is money you're absolutely able to afford to lose.
So crypto is a completely unsuitable investment for every consumer because it's not regulated. There is no regulatory framework for crypto, and therefore it is wide open to fraud, theft, and all other kinds of malfeasance, all of which has happened.
All of which has happened.
All of which has happened. So be avoided at all costs.
All right, thank you, Sharon, for your question. Let's get to the next one from Angie. Here's what she writes. Is it better to gift my children's inheritance before or after I die? And what are the implications in both scenarios? Who would like to take that on?
Maybe I can make a comment about it.
Go ahead, Lesley-Anne.
So I am strongly encouraging families to talk about the giving while living strategy. And the reason is that money can be transformative for young people right in their hands when they need it for home purchases to help them through periods of time where they are lean on cash flow. Examples would be raising a young family, having lower earnings, and or giving the opportunity for them to invest in something else. So I'm talking, I would say, multiple times a week about giving while living as I think it's an anchor strategy in most financial plans where there's flexibility to do so. So I like the concept of it. And, I'll let the others pipe in. I also think it, in many cases, can be a more efficient way to move money to the next generation.
Well, at what point do you pay tax on gifts?
We don't pay tax on gifts.
So
There's
if
no-
it's after someone dies, would you pay tax on that?
Well, tax at death is based on their last tax return. So you can't avoid, you can't avoid paying tax just because you give it early. So if it's a taxable event that would happen to give them the money, you would be doing that earlier if you did it early. And at death, it would be the same. So it's not about trying to save taxes. However, if you have a huge surplus and you're being taxed every year on non-registered money, that taxation is added to your income, and maybe you're facing an OAS clawback. If that was happening and you know that there's no chance you're going to spend this money, then you look for other ways to pass it to the next generation. If you're absolutely sure you're secure, my hesitation would only be not gifting too much too soon, in retirement, that first phase of retirement.
You don't want to run out of money.
Yeah, exactly. So I tell people, try to do it later, and one of the things to gift, think smaller. Think help them contribute to the first home savings account, help them contribute to their TFSA, their RSP along the way, rather than these big lump sums that go to kids too early in retirement.
Can I just step back from the details here? Back to the point Lesley-Anne made, which I agree with completely, that giving money now, if you've got the money set aside, giving it now can be transformative. In terms of affording a down payment, getting a car, saving your children from going into debt to make those same kinds of expenditures. Like, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't give it now, other than if you're starting to worry that, oh, they're gonna take advantage and they're gonna stop working, those kinds of moral or cultural questions. But from a financial point of view, I've just seen it with so many of my friends and my own children. $10,000 all of a sudden can make a huge difference in what they can do this year and the savings they can have as a result of not going into debt.
And that's a very positive note to end on. So that's it for us this evening. We hope what you've heard today equips you to navigate the current economic landscape with confidence. Remember, knowledge is power, and we're here to help you make sense of it all. To get in touch, you can send us an email at comments@thezoomer.com. As always, thank you to my panel and to you at home. We'll see you soon. For now, it's time to zoom out.